How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Welcome back to my conversation with Peter Kusiak, creator of the Fun First strategy and author of the book, Drop the F-Bomb in Your Business. Last time, Peter walked us through his journey into the corporate world, as well as the basic premise of his book. In this new episode, we unpack even further the Fun First strategy, and we'll be hearing more of Peter's experiences in applying his culture building approach to all different variations of the workforce. So let me ask you this. I'm thinking about leaders and the experiences that I've had working with so many leaders. And I'll set this question up with some context that when I think about, we often say that the clients we work with, almost always, their starting point is, it's a pretty darn good culture, and we just help them bring it to a whole different level than where they were before. And that rarely do we work with somebody who has a screwed up dysfunctional culture and try to change it. And the reason for that, in my experience, is that generally speaking, I would say it this way, that if you are a leader, unless it's the case that you just bought this company, but if you've been running this company for a lot of years and it's a completely screwed up, dysfunctional, toxic culture, it's because you don't get it. And if you don't get it, you don't think it's important, and you're not going to spend any money to hire somebody to work on it. So the only people who work on culture, in my experience, generally, are people who already think it's important. And if they already think it's important, they're probably already doing intuitively many of the right things, and we just help them bring it to another level. I'm curious about your experience in a similar way with regard to fun, that I'm guessing it to be the case, but I'm curious about your experience. Is it likely the case that the people who would work with you and want to be more purposeful about creating more fun are probably pretty fun people already, and they just, you could help them be better? Or are you ever successful at taking people who just don't think fun's important, and somehow you get them to see this differently?
Yeah, so my mind's swimming with a couple of different things, as you can imagine. One is, fun and business. I'm already having to tackle one of the biggest bridges to cross in society, right? Like, okay, can business, I already get, the eye rolls and things like that sometimes. But to your point, it's because people haven't really put a value on it yet, right? But before I work with a client, I have two specific evaluations that I do, and they're actually in the book, and they're super fun to take. One is, how fun is my business, right? And you can rate your business from 0 to 10 and get a score and see kind of what the temperature is for adding fun, or how fun your organization currently is. So yes, if you're already at, a 4 or 5 and up, you're going to adopt these strategies. It's going to be a lot of fun in the process, right, for us to implement these. If you're a 0 to 3, we're going to have a deeper conversation, right? A deeper conversation about your value of fun, or your value of creating an environment where you create more opportunities for workplace happiness. I think those tend to be a little bit more open conversations. Like, yes, I want my employees to be happy. I want them to be happier at work. I want them to be successful. So then we can start talking about okay, well, we use fun as a catalyst, right? For those opportunities to create, workplace happiness and healthiness. If you're not open to workplace healthiness and your team to be healthy, and, good luck. You're not going to be a client for me. What I mean?
And I would imagine, though, that if you did that test and you, on a 1 to 10 scale, you were a 2 in terms of how healthy or fun the current environment was.
Yeah.
Again, absent the possibility that you just bought this company and inherited this toxic place.
Yeah.
But if you've been running it for years and it's a 2,
yeah,
I suspect you're not likely a candidate who's going to appreciate this.
Yeah, or you're just absentee, right? As a small business owner, franchisee, right? There was times I would step into the business and be like, oh, this wasn't necessarily the culture that I had envisioned. Maybe it was right, maybe it was wrong. So if I haven't been close to the organization, there may be some opportunities for us to still work together, right? But cultural transformations, it can be a challenge. I would say one of the things that the second evaluation in the book, it's something I do, is how fun am I? Right. And it's kind of doing a self-reflection on, hey, where do I fall on the fun scale? Right. And sometimes if I'm a 0, 1, 2, like, hey, I may not be the one that's like a super fun. I'm, I believe in this, but I'm not the fun person. Right.
Sure.
Or like,
that.
no, it's just kind of, not a candidate for this. But what we're trying to achieve in this evaluation process is to see who is going to be the keeper of this culture. So I call them my champions of fun. All right. You're the champion of fun, because this is the person that is going to be tasked with keeping this culture alive. Right. So one, we have, do you agree with it? Is it something you see as important to your organization? And then who is, going to keep this moving forward? Right. You have to have two parts of that. And I think that's kind of what you're saying is, whether we believe in it or not, great. If we do, okay. But like, what if, like, you still have to have the commitments to making sure that this moves forward. And as a leader, if you're not that person, you say, hey, I believe in the concept, but I'm not the fun person.
Right.
You don't need to own it.
Sure.
Right. You don't need to be the one owning it.
But you do need to say it's important.
Absolutely. You do have to understand that it's an integral piece of building a successful organization. Yeah.
Yeah. I have sometimes or often said, when people ask me about, what is it that leads to success in building great cultures? And I always say that in my experience, the single biggest or most important ingredient in the success of any culture initiative is what I call CEO sponsorship. And that sponsorship word is really what you're saying, is that the CEO has to be the one that he or she says, this is important to us. And if that's not there, we're not going to be successful. Now, that doesn't mean the CEO has to do everything, or in your context, the CEO doesn't have to be Mr. or Mrs. Fun.
Yeah.
But they have to be as the sponsor to say, this is an important thing for us. This is a priority for us. And if that's not there, it rarely is going to work.
Absolutely.
I'm curious about, so when you're working with people, does the primary, I'll call it ownership for this outside of CEO sponsorship, does that usually, I would assume, but maybe not, reside in the HR department? Is that where it's typically owned?
To be honest with you, I get a lot of small business owners that reach out, mainly because of my background, right, in franchising and small business ownership. But for the larger organizations I've spoken to, it very much so is a work with my HR person. The challenges that I've come up with is usually the HR person, hands down, sees the good, the bad, and the ugly of the organization from a people perspective, and they're on board. They're on board, but it kind of really, piggybacks off of the conversation we just had. It's like, okay, you're tasked with this job of cultural transformation, but there's really no buy-in at the top level, right? So I always ask that a shareholder or a senior executive be on those calls with us, at least in the initial conversation, because what I don't want to do is always have to work myself backwards, because in all honesty, typically at the point of HR with people, when you're starting to say healthiness, workplace happiness, cohesion, communication, better team meetings, they're on board. They're 1,000% on board. But then they're trying to take these strategies and convince somebody else that this is how the next team meeting is going to go. And it's, it's a battle. So I always like to have, the main decision makers, the main culture keepers, the main, shareholders, if you will, on those, at least the preliminary call, so we can have a deeper discussion. What are we really trying to achieve here? And who's going to be responsible for achieving this? And it's got to be together. It's got to be together.
Yeah. So many of the people that we talk to, especially these days more than ever before, and I'm sure you see it, there are so many more people working remotely since COVID, obviously. And we hear from many companies, we used to have this great culture. Everybody was together, and we used to, have breakfast together and do all these things together. And now we're working remotely or hybrid, and I'm worried that we don't have the same feeling that we used to have. So how do you work with remote companies to help them create more fun?
Remote is some of my most work that I'm doing right now
Mm-hmm.
with clients.
Well, it's a concern of so many.
It is, and I would say that it's multifold, right? Because there's a lot of things that need to happen. But one is embrace technology.
Mm-hmm.
You have to embrace technology and make sure that you're up to date on the softwares, especially communication softwares, team communications, and I can rattle off a bazillion of them. My favorite is Slack, right?
Mm-hmm.
But certainly there are opportunities for you to create moments for teams to communicate outside of meetings and different things like that. But you have to have the technology to support that. Two, technology right now, like I was just playing with a client last week, and we were playing Uno live, the
Mm-hmm.
three of us, through a software that was 100% free, but we were playing Uno
Mm-hmm.
and talking about the value of the fund first strategy. It was
Mm-hmm.
wonderful, right? So there are opportunities. It goes back to the gameplay. You got to be bought into playing games, but we did do that, right? So there's opportunities there, and then the other piece is you have to foster this. You have to create opportunities for them to, whether it's finding the common interest. I'll give you an example. Coffee was huge. I love coffee. I was talking with
Mm-hmm.
an organization recently that everybody was a coffee lover. I said, well, why don't you just take 15 minutes, a day and schedule them a 15-minute coffee time or a coffee break, right? And it's not work. That's just, you're going to sit down and meet somebody new or talk to a colleague over coffee. Everybody likes coffee. And by the way, if
Mm-hmm.
the organization is willing to give a stipend for the coffee or have the coffee delivered, that's taken it to a whole new level. That shows a level of commitment and care to your people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to foster, you have to purposefully go into these exercises with intention, right? Especially with remote, and you have to schedule them. You have to be a really good scheduler. So if you're not a good scheduler, if you're HR person, make sure that, again, the technology, the scheduling, everybody's on board, but you'll find opportunities to do that. Music is great. Music is great remotely.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this already. There's opportunities for people to share music, to be guest DJs, to start and end meetings with music, share playlists. You never know what you're going to uncover
Mm-hmm.
when you start, in implementing these little things remotely. You'll start to find common interest amongst your team. Another good example was I just worked with a team that loved sushi. It was like we spent maybe
Mm-hmm.
15 minutes just talking about our love for sushi. So the organization has decided that they're going to be sending sushi lunches once a week, and that they're going to do it. It's not a lunch and learn. There's no purpose behind it. It's just a mental health. We're going to eat sushi together once a week and talk about it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that commitment. It's that fun, break that we're talking about that allows them now to be more creative going into their jobs, right? Into their roles, into their customer interactions. They're like, oh, well, I'm feeling really great. I have a work for
Mm-hmm.
an amazing organization that cares about me, and that they work even harder. So there are opportunities remotely, but you do have to work harder through technology, scheduling, and a commitment to doing it.
Yeah, because it doesn't happen on its own because we're not together.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
I'm curious about. I mean, there's a lot being written these days, and a lot of people are talking about the difference in the generations, and that must come up in your work often. I'm guessing that different generations either expect different things out of work, and or even probably define fun in different ways.
Yeah.
So tell me more about how do you address different generations in the same workforce?
I find that fun is one of the most cross-generationally accepted concepts there is. It's just that brand of fun, right? And finding
Right.
the common interest and things like that. Diverse perspectives, like you said. I think, some of the older generations, right? I'm not going to label anybody, but some of the older generations don't necessarily, they're like, hey, I'm here to work. I'm here to make a paycheck, and that's great, So sometimes they're not necessarily bought in, but honestly, those are the ones that let loose the most when we have a company outing. Or do team building. They're like, yeah, I was so in need for this, right? So you kind of get some, whereas a younger generation is expecting to come in to an organization with a vibrant culture that cares about their people, constant initiatives and things like that. and weighing organizations against each other that do these things, right? So one is the common interest. So if you can send a form out, there's, anything, or I would even say in a team meeting, if you could just implement an icebreaker, anything to start getting people talking about their interests, you will find that there's more in common than there's not. And I give a really good example, is that card playing. I like cards, right? Like I like to go to the casino from time to time. I like to do my, blackjack and things like that. But do you know who taught me how to play blackjack? It was like my 80-something-year-old grandmother when I was a kid, right? She did, so there are games, there are themes that are cross-generational. You just have to find them, right? Like, a casino night or a casino day, or, if we could build a team outing, like there's so much you can do once you know what those common interests are. Music is another good cross-generational thing. A lot of songs now are taken from artists back in the day. Like there's so much you can do. You just have to find what those cultural, themes are, and you'll get along great. So yeah, it does come up a lot, but I think that fun is for me, I always believe fun is universal. Everybody likes to have it. It's just, what's that brand? Now, ultimately, yeah, somebody's always going to say, I don't like to have fun. I call them the unfun. You're not, then okay,
Right.
If our organization is founded or committed to fun, maybe you're not a good fit.
Yeah.
That's okay too. That's okay.
Yeah. So I'm always curious, when people have been doing something for a while, as you have and I have, I'm curious always about learnings. And so I suspect that there are things perhaps when you started doing this work that you thought were good ideas or how things should be, and learned through experience, it's not quite the way I thought, or it's maybe more nuanced than I thought, or different than I thought. And now you bring some of that wisdom into your work. Can you give me an example of what's something you learned that you used to think and maybe think differently about today?
Well, that's a really good question. So, when I first started as a business owner, I did think it was, work hard, grind, all your dreams will come true. And that is the case. I mean, there is hard work in anything that you do, right? But it wasn't as detrimental as I thought it was going to be. And I'll give you I'll give you kind of how I frame this up. So I used to think as a small business owner, oh my gosh, somebody's calling out or they need to take off, and it's like, if I'm not open for business, right, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to close, like I'm going to be done, it's going to be over with, and like these unwanted stresses of things when what is the worst thing that's going to happen if a door doesn't open? I see it now after COVID almost daily. There's a note on the door saying, hey, sorry, our staff needed a mental health day and they didn't come in. Is that the worst thing?
Life goes on. Yeah,
life goes on. Life goes on. The business is open the next day, right? And I think that we are definitely in a more open society now, at least here in the States, right? About taking care of our people and recognizing them. And so I learned from that. It's like, it's not the end of the world when things go bad. You should be thinking about, like, why did they? And then, hey, how can I make this fun so it doesn't happen again, right? Like, was I guilty of pushing a grind culture? Was I guilty of, putting undue stresses on my people, right? And we make those corrections. I think the other thing is hiring. I think that when we were interviewing and hiring from the beginning, we used to, we used to really kind of adopt more of a corporate structure, right? Like, kind of do everything the way everyone was doing. But we quickly realized we're a small business and we needed to embrace the charm of a small business, right? And we were more successful that way. We talked about the things that made us different. We talked about that fun was a big driver in what we did. We talked about the teamwork that we were doing and the opportunities to take fun breaks so that we could differentiate ourselves from the Fortune 500. Because when people apply to careers, to jobs, sometimes small business can be overlooked, but they don't really realize the wonderful opportunities that exist there because, this, that, or the other, or because as the interviewer or as the person doing it, you're creating an environment that's very much corporate or how it was done to you. So I always like, well, no, take that off the table. Like, we don't need to be replicating the same thing that we're not a large organization.
Right.
We're a small, intimate, and we can be who we are. And so we just embrace that. So, I would say over the years, I look back at our quirkiness, and maybe some folks, that would have been absolutely fantastic. Sort of like the example you gave earlier, would have been absolutely fantastic in our organization, would have had a great time. But they were a little nervous to come in. Right. Because of the quirkiness. They didn't feel like a good fit. And I would much rather that they didn't come in after the offer was accepted than come in and just be like, wow, this really does not fit with me. Because to be honest with you, a very vibrant, electric, type A personality culture can give anxiety to people that are on the opposite side. They're more introverted. They're a little more, they like to watch, things like that. But so we need to have open conversations to begin to find the right match. So we had to address that very early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there differences, do you think, in different nationalities and how we relate to fun? Do U.S. companies relate to fun differently than a European company or an Asian company or other?
I don't have a whole lot of experience yet working with Asia and cultures in there. But the UK absolutely adores what I'm doing. I get calls from folks all the time. So I think, from a Europe perspective, it seems to be at least receptive. And my book has got an international award already, but I get calls a lot from UK. So I think that that's being adopted there. Obviously, in the US, we do have there's so much media around culture and happiness and mental health. And, May was Mental Health Awareness Month for us. So I think there's a lot of conversations around it. But in my experience, it's more of, the US is doing this. It must be cutting edge. Maybe we should adopt it. But like I said, I don't have a whole lot of experience working with the Asian cultures.
I wonder about that. I also wonder about, again, this is stereotypical, so may not be valid, but you think of the stereotype of German culture as being rigid and serious and buttoned down. And I wonder how receptive they would be to the notion that you could have a fun-first strategy.
Yeah. I'd love the opportunity to chat with him.
Yeah. Be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Pete. If people want to learn more about the Fun First strategy and the work that you do, where would they find you? How would they learn more about you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, www.thefunfirststrategy.com. There's some really neat things on there. I did some great research before writing the book that I have a whole tab about. You can see the benefits of fun at work and that customers want to have fun too, and all the research behind that. My book is available through the website as well. I'll sign a copy, send it your way. Just you can purchase there, or you can grab the book too, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, all the major retailers online. So to get more information, what's neat about the book, one of the biggest things people have told me is I've actually created mandatory fun breaks with puzzles and games in between as you read. And it's been a huge hit. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Super. Well, I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and experience with us, Pete. I know it adds an important element to our audience's learning about culture and how to build culture in an intentional way. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me so much. I enjoyed chatting with you.
Great. And that's it for today's episode of Culture Architects with my fellow culture architect, Peter Kusiak, author and creator of the Fun First Strategy. Folks, if you've been enjoying our show, make sure you subscribe, and that way you'll get automatic updates on my newest episodes and my latest guests. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love it if you left us a review, and that way more culture fans like you can discover the show. And if you'd like to learn more about how to build a high-performing culture in your organization, check us out at CultureWise.com. See you next time on Culture Architects.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.